Hello, everyone. Good morning and good afternoon to our attendees today. This is Brooke Akins, and on behalf of Q1 Productions and Sales Readiness Group, I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar and thank you for joining us. Today's course is going to focus on transitioning star sales representatives into high-impact sales managers. We're very lucky to have Mr. Norman Behar, who's the Chairman and Managing Director, as well as Ray Makela, who is the CEO and Managing Director of Sales Readiness Group with us today. And they're going to be providing insightful best practices and strategies for creating effective sales management and development programs. This webinar will include live polling and chat discussions, and there will also be an opportunity to get your questions answered by our presenters today once they're finished speaking. But please feel free to submit these questions and comments at any time during the presentation via the questions feature in the GoToMeeting toolbar on the right-hand side of your screen. I do know we have a few teams participating with us today. Should anyone not have GoToMeeting right in front of them, please feel free to submit your questions and comments directly to me via email to webinars, WEBINARS, at q1productions.com, and I'll ensure they're included. But without further ado, I want to introduce our presenters today. Again, Mr. Norman Behar has over 25 years of CEO and senior sales management experience. He's worked with clients in a range of industries, including financial services, healthcare technology, manufacturing, and distribution. Before joining SRG, Norman served as the president and CEO of Catapult, a leading provider of personal computer training services, where he oversaw operations and managed growth before the company's acquisition by IBM. We also have Mr. Ray Makela, who has over 25 years of management, consulting, and sales experience. Before joining SRG, Ray worked at Codisic, which was a consulting group where he was responsible for business development, managing customer relationships, and the development and implementation of the company's sales training initiatives. Ray has also worked at Accenture and Claremont Technology Group, where he has a where he served as a management consultant in the change management practice. Very excited to have Sales Readiness Group with us today, and would like to hand it over to our presenters. Again, Norman Behar and Ray Makela. Gentlemen, good morning to you from the West Coast. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the very kind introduction, and thank you all for joining us for this presentation today. We're excited. Ray and I are both very passionate about the transition from sales to sales management, and I'll just share with you a little bit about Sales Readiness Group. For those of you who are not familiar with our company, basically we are a award-winning sales training company. We've been well recognized in the industry by Selling Power Training Industry, ATD. Our focus is on customized sales and sales management training programs. On the bottom right-hand corner of the screen, you'll see a book that we recently released called The High Impact Sales Manager. It's a synopsis of our sales training program for managers, and some of that content at a very high level will find its way in today's presentation. We focus on instructional design and combining that with industry-leading content. And that's also included now in our new on-demand training offerings. We released last year the High Impact Sales Coach. We'll talk more about that later in the program. We're having a whole new wave of on-demand offerings coming out for 2019. So we're excited. Our goal, of course, is to make sure that every program we work with a client on is sustainable. And if you visit our website, salesreadinessgroup.com, you'll get a better sense for our offerings and our success with clients. We take a lot of pride in making sure that every engagement is successful, custom tailored for our clients, and sustainable. So with that, I want to just kind of jump into our agenda for today. And the key points we want to cover is how sales management impacts results. So obviously, everyone here is interested in driving better results and higher performance from their organizations. Some industry research we conducted recently, kind of highlighting the most important skills for managers. 4 of those we want to go into in a little bit more detail: the hiring, and particularly the manager's role in behavior-based interviewing. So it always helps to have the right people on the team. Managing sales performance, which really gets to how do you manage a team and really look at the behaviors that drive performance, not just the results. Sales coaching, how do you work with each individual on your team to really get the highest level of performance. Sales leadership, how do you motivate and inspire your team. And then some very key tangible takeaways from today's session. So with that, I'd like to just discuss a little bit about how sales management skills improve results. And we think about sales management skills, kind of as being in the center here. And we look at all ways that sales managers can improve overall sales organization results, whether that's accelerating sales performance, producing better forecasts, getting better people on their team, having their team do a better job of how they communicate with their customers, and using selling skills as kind of the basis for improving that sales conversation, having a highly motivated team, and being able to make sure that your vision for your sales team is in line with your company's vision, including the goals, strategies, and tactics for achievement of that vision. So sales managers can have a very profound impact on results. These are just a few of the ways that managers impact results. So Ray, I'm going to transition to a poll. I'm going to call on Brooke in just a sec to help us, but any thoughts before we get a little bit of our audience to participate in today's session?
Yeah, well, thanks, Norman and Brooke. I appreciate the opportunity to be here as well. And, I think as we look at this, both getting some of the input from the group today, and we'll talk a little bit more about our research study, but what's interesting to me about this particular slide and sales management training in general is to really think about what we're trying to accomplish, right? What does it mean to have better managers? And as you highlighted, if we can address or influence one or two of these categories, there's a very strong ROI, right? If we can have better hiring and onboarding and ramp people up, if we can help through better management to improve their performance, to increase their motivation and influence, and as we know, people typically quit their manager, they don't quit their job. So if that helps improve retention, I mean, there are a number of things that we can look towards that really help to develop the business case for training our managers and investing in them, because better managers equals better sales results, and that's really what this is about. So it'd be great to get some input from the group here.
Great. So one of the questions we often ask clients when we're talking with prospective clients or even current clients is, as you think about your next fiscal year, what are kind of some of the highest level priorities? And I guess what we'd like to do next is really understand your top 3 areas for improvement. So I'm going to ask Brooke for a little bit of help here to open up a poll. But is it really getting better forecasting, something usually very important to senior management, hiring better, having better hiring decisions so that you have better retention and better performance, improving how your team sells, improve their motivation to sell, or execution of the sales vision? So Brooke, if we could launch that poll, that would be great.
Yep, here we go. I know some people are at lunch today, but we're getting our first poll, so put down whenever you're eating and please enter in your answers. What are your top 3 areas of improvement? Again, our options are let me move my thing, more accurate forecasts, better hiring decisions, improved selling skills, increased motivation, or execution of sales vision. I'm going to keep this open for probably about the next 40 seconds or so. Again, anybody who is on the line here, let's put in your answers. Right now, we're looking at about 50% increased motivation. I'm going to give this a little bit more time. Again, options are more accurate forecasts, better hiring decision, improved selling skills, increased motivation, and execution of sales vision. Keep this open for just a little while longer. It's looking like a pretty interesting balance of improved selling skills, increased motivation, and execution of sales vision. Give this a couple more seconds. Again, anyone who hasn't voted, please put in your poll and we will share the results in just a moment.
Great. Well, we're waiting just before we close the poll, Brooke. I just turn back to Ray for a minute. Ray, if you had to highlight one, based on your conversations with clients, which one would you say comes up most frequently when you're speaking to clients?
Yeah, and I was going to make the comment, it's really hard to choose just one of these. One, because they are interrelated, and some of them are really more outcomes versus things we're trying to influence in advance. In our case, and I think about our team, improving the selling skills, we know the more that we can invest and improve that sales conversation, it will drive results. And then also, I think motivation, which gets to activity levels, and as we said, it also gets to their overall satisfaction and engagement on the job, which pulls through to retention. So I think a lot of organizations, that's a very important one, because the cost of hiring somebody, as we'll talk about, is so significant. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see the results from the group here.
Great. So Brooke, if you want to share the results, that's great. And it's really interesting. Improving selling skills and motivation, 2 that you selected were 2 of the 3 highest. execution of the sales vision, and then kind of behind that, more accurate forecast. So, I think you're right when we think about, and we'll introduce a concept later that gets to, proficiency and motivation. Those are really the two drivers of success. Does someone know how to do something, and does someone want to do something? I am a little bit intrigued by the execution of the sales vision, Ray. That's probably the highest we've seen for that. Any thoughts about that?
Well, I think it's actually also potentially seasonal in the from the standpoint that people are looking at 2019, and we had a post last week that said if you're looking at improving the performance of your sales team in 2019, look at your sales team and your sales managers right now. What are you doing for your managers to enable them to support the team? So I think that could be a result of managers are thinking about their sales plans, supporting the sales vision, and they're starting to do those offsites or those planning sessions to think about 2019. And it's great. It's a great outcome because we really should be, as sales managers, thinking about how what we do with our team is supporting the larger organization and the larger sales vision. We should have that business plan for our sales team, if you will. And so I think that's probably top of mind, just given going into fourth quarter here.
Great. Brooke, thank you for your help with the poll. And Ray, we mentioned we're going to share some findings based on the research we did with Selling Power. So I'm going to turn that over to you to kind of walk through what we did, how we organized things, and most importantly, what we found.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll have contact information at the end where if people would like a copy of this survey and the report, we're happy to provide that. But basically, we partnered with Selling Power to get the survey out to about 400 different respondents, and it was really a mix. About over half of the people that participated were sales leaders, so a sales leadership role, and we really wanted to get their perspective. And then we also got a lot of great input from sales enablement and operations, as well as kind of training and learning and development folks. This was cross-industry, so it really cut across a number of different areas, and the demographics are spelled out in the research report. But what we tried to do was really get to the idea of what makes a high-performing sales team and what are the managers doing differently in those groups. So you see the breakout here, and what we did early on in the survey, we just asked the question, what percentage of your reps are achieving quota? And we tried to characterize that those that were achieving 75% or more, or had 75% or more of their reps achieving quota, we classified as high impact or high performing organizations, because we then wanted to look at what are they doing differently from a sales management perspective that might correlate to their higher performance levels. And so you can kind of see, obviously the largest group was the average performers between 25 and 75% of quota, and those that were at 25% or less were kind of low performing organizations. So we had then identified a number of hallmarks, based on the survey results and the breakout of those groups.
So Ray, what's really interesting about this, I know we're going to kind of share the hallmarks and then I think on the next slide, in terms of what is it that the high impact team, those that had 75% or more of the reps, do differently or better. But I just also ask, our participants to think about that 63%. And, one of the concepts for sales management, and particularly for sales coaching, is moving the middle. And imagine if we were able to take half of that 63% and move them to the high impact. So I think it's really important to look at what it is the high impact group is doing differently, and then think about how could we implement those same type of skills to move the middle and get more of those average performers to become high performers. So I'll flip the slide here, Ray, and maybe you can just walk through the 5 hallmarks.
Sure. Well, again, kind of following that survey approach and then the results that came out of it, we asked about a number of different areas and tried to get an idea of, what were they doing relative to coaching and both skills and deal coaching. So how does that pull through? And we found, interestingly enough, the high impact organizations tended to do more coaching. So they had more managers spending 20% or more of their time coaching their team. So at least a day a week, which we think is a minimum, as a pretty significant finding. And also they were investing more in training their managers to be coaches. So they had a higher budget. They were spending more time doing that. And then you can see the other hallmarks here: managing performance, which is all about setting expectations and communicating if there's a gap in performance, and how we address that. We'll get into that a little bit. How they recruit and hire for the team, getting the right people on the bus, as people have said, and what was their approach for doing that. Also, how do they develop trust and respect in their team, which really gets to those leadership attributes of, building a strong vision and being able to motivate and influence and communicating with respect and clearly. So that was another clear hallmark. And then, the final piece was just the overall investment that they were making in their managers. And across the board, those high impact organizations tended to spend more on their managers and spend more time training their managers compared to the lower performing groups.
I think this is really insightful, and we're going to certainly touch on most of these areas. I want to just kind of come back to our headline for today's webinar, which is really about the transition from sales rep to sales manager and why that's so difficult. And I love this image, and maybe it's because, and some of the words on the slide, it's maybe because Ray and I are both based out of Seattle, so it rains here a lot, and we see hopefully, a sales manager that's kind of stuck in the daily grind. And Seattle's also one of the coffee capitals of the world. But what happens is sales managers are often kind of responding to urgent requests. They're resolving customer issues or complaints. Obviously, no shortage of employee issues. Salespeople aren't easy to manage. In many cases, the salespeople they're now asked to manage were formerly their peers. They have to prepare forecasts, reports. They go to meetings. And while all these issues and responsibilities are important, they don't really move the organization forward. So quite often the managers can feel very stuck. They work Monday through Friday if it's in the kind of B2B sales. They do all of these things, and then the cycle repeats itself. But unfortunately, none of these really move the sales organization forward. They're basically just treading water. And so when I think about that, you think about, well, why is that? And it really comes down to skill set. The skills that made you successful as a salesperson and likely led to your promotion. You were great at sales, so why wouldn't you be great at sales management? So you were a star athlete. Doesn't necessarily achieve to being a great sales manager, because in the sales management, it's really not about your own personal success. It's about achieving success through others. And, Ray, I know you've blogged about that, why it may not always make sense to promote your top salesperson. That said, companies do it, and I think that whether they promoted an average salesperson, a top salesperson, there is a very different skill set. And I'll just kind of bring up one more slide to illustrate the point. And if you think about what it is that you do as a sales rep to really be successful, you prospect, you ask great questions, you listen, you manage objections, you gain commitment, you have to have product knowledge, and you have to kind of manage your own time. That's a very important skill set. It's going to be important as a manager also, because the people you're managing are sales reps, so you have to have credibility with that team. At the same time, you have to have a different set of skills as a sales manager. So how am I going to set team goals and priorities? How am I going to recruit and select the right people? How am I going to coach them? How am I going to manage performance, lead and motivate? I have to have a little broader knowledge about the industry and trends. And I'm not just managing my own time, but I'm actually trying to manage the time for my entire team. And so a lot of managers, at least from my perspective, resort to doing what they did best, which is selling, as opposed to really making the transition to sales manager. And that's because these skills are not necessarily intrinsic. They're skills that really need to be learned and developed. Ray, we're going to get into these skills in a little bit more detail, but before we do any other thoughts, again, it's a topic you've blogged on quite a bit, so I just wanted to have you share maybe a couple of thoughts before we move on.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think it's interesting, we're not suggesting that high-performing reps can't make good managers. In fact, sometimes they do, and they're just exceptional performers, and they make that transition. But the point is, we shouldn't assume that those attributes that made them great as an individual contributor transfer and will naturally make them a good sales manager. And as you've highlighted here, it really is a different skill set. So, I think regardless of which sport you may follow, you can find great examples and challenging examples of where the top performing athlete made that transition to coach or manager and then struggled significantly to be able to coach others and to be able to communicate how to do it the way they did, because they were just exceptional in their own right. So I think we just need to be sensitive to that. We need to look at some of those other skills around how they communicate, how they work with others, putting others first, that idea of servant leadership. I think there's a lot that's wrapped up in that we should really choose that carefully. And sometimes it's the middle performer, but who understands the whole game, who ends up being the best manager, the best coach in the end, and we can develop those skills and help them be even more successful.
Terrific. And I think when we, tying back to the research, we found that those companies had a propensity to invest more. So it's not a surprise that, those companies that had a higher performing sales teams invested more in their managers. But when we think about the specific skill areas, here's 4 that are highlighted, and they're actually pretty well documented in our book, The High Impact Sales Manager, and also our training programs. And we thought we'd just walk you through at a high level how we define each of these skills and some of the key insights, at least at a high level, we could share with you related to hiring, managing, coaching, and leading a team. And Ray, why don't you start us off with hiring?
Yeah, absolutely. And as we said, get the right people on the team. Let's make sure we have those players in place. And I think one of the challenges is we don't always consider just how expensive a decision that is, or how significant a decision that is. And not to say that we take it lightly, but we're quick to fill that position. We think, oh, we need somebody to cover that territory or to replace that rep. But if we put the wrong person in that position, the impact can be just exponential. And what I mean by that is when we think about all the costs up front to recruit and advertise and get the candidates and go through that process, right? We've got that initial investment. Then once we make the decision, we've got the training and the ramp up costs, and we've got that period of time where they're frankly not very productive because they're coming up to speed. We've got to pay them, so they're the base salary. We've got all the other benefits that are associated with that. And then if they're not good in that position, we have the gap of what would that territory have been producing otherwise. So we're missing our numbers, right? We're underperforming versus our quota or our targets. We're losing time in terms of ramping up somebody else or kind of getting ahead of it. And, the customer risk, I think, shouldn't be taken lightly, that, not only could we potentially lose customers, but we're not building those long-term relationships that result in ongoing business because, we've got somebody in there that frankly maybe wasn't a good fit for the position. So, I've heard different metrics used, but typically 2 to 3 times that annual salary is what we're going to spend in direct and indirect costs to replace that person. And that's not even considering if the territory goes underutilized or underserved. It could be many times more than that. So, I think we should look at that. We should consider that very carefully. And we're going to propose, take a systematic process that will, I think, help improve our chances of getting the right person in the position.
So Ray, you mentioned a systematic process. In the interest of the time that we have today, we won't be able to cover the entire process, but kind of one of the center features of that process is behavior-based interviewing, and how that helps managers identify and select the best person to hire, which based on the cost of hiring a bad rep is really critical. So maybe just take us through a couple key elements related to behavior-based interviewing and the type of questioning that would be associated with that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, this starts, and really if we're starting at the bottom rung there, the idea is let's make sure we understand the competencies that we're looking for and what we consider kind of the profile of that top performing rep that you're looking for. So what are all the things we expect them to do? What do they look like so that we can really capture that? And a lot of times the frontline managers, there's a general recruiting maybe profile or posting, but it doesn't really get to, what are the individuals on the team doing that make them successful? We have a template that we use for that, but I think there should be some time building that profile, understanding those competencies, and then the next layer up, what are the behaviors that indicate they're going to be able to perform in that position, that they're going to demonstrate that, and how do we get to those behaviors? And ultimately, that's where the behavioral-based interviewing comes in, and having a library or a bank of interview questions that are really specific to those underlying behaviors and show evidence. This isn't hypothetical interviewing. This is very specifically asking questions that are going to help us understand whether they've demonstrated those behaviors in the past.
I think that's really critical. If we think about, the competencies, examples of competencies can include motivation, work ethic, and integrity. And these are not, well, they're absolutely critical to how someone might perform in the job. They're not things that are captured on a resume in the way that you would capture work experience or educational background. So really figuring out whether someone has work ethic, integrity, a topic you've blogged a lot about, Ray, on grit, really comes down to behavior-based interviewing. And, we're not the only company that uses this methodology, but I think it's really a very sound methodology on the STAR questioning model.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you mentioned, this has been around. I think it's a very proven approach, but applying it to sales, I think requires a little bit more nuance. And that is, let's break that down into very specific to a sales position in terms of what are those things we're looking for. You mentioned grit, that passion, the perseverance that we're looking for, the ability to engage with the customer and develop a relationship, right? So relationship building, communicating clearly and with impact, being able to be curious about our customer. What are all those things that we'd like our top performing reps to demonstrate? Once we've identified that, then being able to have them or ask them to tell a story about a situation where they accomplished something or they demonstrated that behavior, getting very specific then into what was the specific task you were doing and what actions were involved with accomplishing that. So, I always like to ask, well, tell me about a deal you lost, right? So it's kind of open-ended, but if they're an existing or experienced salesperson, tell me about a deal that you recently lost. What was the situation in the lead up? What were the tasks that were involved that you were doing and the specific actions that you were taking as you moved that deal forward? And then ultimately, what was the result that came out of it? I don't care that you lost, but I'd like to understand your thought process. I'd like to understand the behaviors that you demonstrated. And, do you close that by saying, yeah, and I went out and actually closed 2 larger deals, based on what I learned, or, what was the takeaway? So I think, we can get a really good picture and perspective on that individual by using the STAR questioning approach.
Yeah, as I think about that, just kind of popped in my mind, but those would be great questions to really test for resilience. If you're asking about a deal that someone lost, just kind of hearing the tone and what they did based on what they learned from that and how they applied it might demonstrate whether someone has resilience or not. So that's kind of what we mean by using these behavior-based questions as a basis for understanding competencies and the associated behaviors. Another key element we learned, let me advance the slide here, is about management and managing sales performance. And before I get in and describe that area and kind of what we mean by a behavior-based performance management system, I want to get back to something that Ray had mentioned earlier, where it got back to communicating expectations, managing activity levels, having difficult conversations, taking action with low performers. And again, call on Brooke to help us, but we'd like to pose a question, just kind of get your feedback, which is, what areas of performance management do your managers find to be most challenging? So Brooke, with your assistance, we'd love to pull up that poll.
Poll is
and get
active.
Some audience participation.
Yep, poll is active and ready to go. Again, question is, what area of performance management do your managers find most challenging? Options, communicating expectations. 2, managing sales activity levels. 3, having difficult conversations. And 4, proactively taking action with low performers. We'll keep this open for about the next 60 to 90 seconds. We see these results coming in already. Please send through your answers.
Okay, and Brooke, you and I and Ray have the advantage of kind of seeing as these are coming in real time. I'll just comment briefly on communicating expectations, and it had to do with a video blog that we just recorded. It was based on one that we had developed a couple of years ago, and a lot of times managers think they set clear expectations, but they come to find out later it wasn't quite as clear in their salesperson's mind as it was in their own mind. And I think that one of the things there is to really define what the result is, what are the associated behaviors, and over what period of time. So it's very clear, what is it you want them to achieve, what are they going to need to do to achieve it, and over what period of time. And actually having the salesperson share back with you their understanding, and doing that at the beginning of a quarter as an example, as opposed to the end of a quarter where a number's been missed, can have a huge difference. So even though a lot of managers think they do a great job of communicating expectations, that isn't always the case. Brooke, how are we doing on this poll here?
We just closed it off, and let me share the results.
Right. So Raymond, I'll let you take the lead. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, it started with, and we kind of have a tie on a few of these, but on communicating expectations, and as you were describing that, I was thinking about our cause action flow chart, which is kind of a troubleshooting guide we have for managers that if they're struggling with performance, they can kind of work their way down and hopefully uncover the root cause. And the first question on there is, have I communicated expectations and have I provided feedback? And I think if we haven't done that, it really goes to the manager first, that we can't hold our team accountable or manage their performance if we haven't first accurately communicated and given them feedback on what we expect them to do. We shouldn't just assume that they know, as you said. The other area is managing activity levels, which I think is always challenging. One, are we looking at the right activity levels? Are we looking at behaviors and results as we're managing kind of leading and lagging indicators? And then also taking action when we have low performers. What are we doing proactively to improve that? It's interesting that the lowest was having difficult conversations, and maybe that's because we feel more comfortable with that, but it goes to, are we having the right kind of difficult conversations? Are we really addressing those gaps in performance when we need to, and kind of course correcting or identifying, well, what do we need to do? Do we need to train them? Do we need to motivate them? Do we need to provide them more feedback? What can we do to help them get them back on track?
Yeah, I think what you're alluding to, at least I think what you're alluding to, is that quite often we have the difficult conversations when it's too late, as opposed to having those difficult conversations earlier in the well, there's still time to course correct. So a lot of times those difficult conversations may be about performance plans, but had we had them a little bit earlier, we might have been able to do some coaching, some training and mentoring. And it's rare that a manager says that they didn't wait long enough to take action. They usually are typically waiting too long. And I think having those difficult conversations earlier is certainly something most managers can work on. Let me share a little bit about managing sales performance and just, again, a little bit about how we think about it. So we know most managers, and Brooke, thank you for sharing the poll and helping us with that. So most managers do a really good job, and most organizations do a really good job of measuring results. And many organizations have digital dashboards, and they're measuring those results in real time. But what we really want to get managers thinking about is not necessarily the results. Those results are going to be based on positive and consistent behaviors. So what are the underlying behaviors that really drive results? And an example we use, and we've used this in other webinars and in our training, is one that people often focus on, which is weight loss. Well, I can get on the scale every single day, weigh myself, and maybe that will create some motivation to lose weight, but it doesn't result in weight loss by itself. The underlying activities or behaviors that drive would be diet, whether that's healthy food or portion control or exercise or some combination of those that will really result in weight loss. And I think about sales results in the same way. What are the underlying behaviors that drive sales results? Is it more prospecting? Is it more face-to-face appointments? Is it more proposals? There's a lot of activities we can take that influence results that are the leading indicators. And so at a very high level, I'll just share a model that we train to, which is our performance management system. It begins by communicating and monitoring the critical success factors. Quite often, those are results. Then identifying the key behaviors that are aligned with those results. So, if we think about, new business, one of those key behaviors would be prospecting. When we look at the behaviors, there can be performance gains. Performance gains are things that salespeople are doing better than we would have anticipated. We certainly want to have a really positive reinforcement around those gains, make sure that they continue. And often we find gaps in behaviors. Just my simple example on prospecting, maybe someone's not doing enough prospecting to really drive new business. If we determine that there's a performance gap, how do we analyze what the underlying causes are? Again, there can be a lot of different causes. People are complex. it could do with attitude, it could do with knowledge, it could do with motivation, it could do with skills. And then once we kind of get our sense for what the underlying cause is, what's the appropriate action we could take? And that was a flow chart that Ray was speaking about earlier. Is we actually have this flow chart, and he mentioned it always comes back to setting, communicating expectations. But as you get further and further through the flow chart, the actions you would take would become increasingly more, more what I'll call more, a little bit more forceful as you're looking at what the underlying cause might be. But again, if you're having those conversations early in the process, there's a lot of time to course correct. So that's kind of a synopsis on how we look at performance management. Ray, before we transition to coaching, anything else you'd want to add here?
No, but just well, I guess in terms of when we deliver and work with managers on kind of going through this process, what's always interesting to me is managers are really good at jumping to step 4, so taking action, because they've been there in the sales team, and typically they're pretty comfortable. They know what the fix is, and so they'll jump in and do it. But they may be less consistent or spend less time actually thinking about the underlying causes, and so they may be fixing the wrong problem, or they may be suggesting to do it their way versus really understanding just because the individual doesn't know how to do it, or because they're not making an effort, or because something else is getting in the way, or because maybe we didn't communicate the expectations. So at any rate, I think this is helpful to kind of slow that down a little bit and be a little bit more thoughtful about what the underlying problem is, and then making the appropriate action to address it.
Absolutely. So clearly hiring the right people, managing the team, but the area that we see the greatest interest in is, and one that came up at number 1 in our Hallmarks, was coaching. And that really gets to how do you work with each individual. So Ray, I know you do a lot of work around coaching. Why don't you share your perspective, and we'll chat about coaching.
Yeah, absolutely. And coaching is one of those most significant activities that a manager can do to improve the performance of their team. And it really helps the manager create leverage, right? So help the manager help their individuals solve their own problems and be able to be more self-sufficient. So I think we really want to spend time doing that. And it's one of those that's hard because we have to make time, we have to be proactive about it. But we know that if we spend time coaching, we're going to improve their skills. And as a result, performance will improve, and we'll spend less time, and I always like to make a point of this, doing our reps' job for them. Because I've seen so many managers who talk about how overworked they are. It's a thankless job. It's one of the, I think, hardest working positions in most organizations. And a lot of times it is because we're doing the job of 8 or 10 reps. We're helping them close deals. We're helping them fight customer fires. We're, getting in front and taking over their sales calls for them. So coaching is the ability to kind of step back a little bit and help them improve those skills so that we don't have to be there every time, kind of managing them by remote control or managing them, in person.
Right, and I think the key here is the leverage comes because managers typically have anywhere between 3 and 10 sales reps reporting to them, and if they can improve the skills, they're getting leverage across their entire team. They're also doing something I think is really important for personal growth, which is they're learning to empower others. And so if someone's moved up to a frontline manager, this idea of just learning how to empower others is something they'll be able to keep with them throughout their career, and that's going to create, again, the leverage we're referring to. Brooke, I want to call on you again to help us here. I think we're going to use the question pod to get some responses to this question. But the question we want to ask is, what are your manager's most significant sales coaching challenges? And the reason we pose this question is I think there's no one that would disagree that coaching is very important, and yet we find that managers coach a lot less than they probably should, and that came through in the research that we did. So if we could get some responses to this question, I think, Brooke, help us out here. where do you want people to respond and how do you want them to respond?
So for our attendees, if you could just respond in your questions feature, feel free to send that through to all the organizers or myself, Q1 Productions webinars. Again, his question is right there on the screen for you, and we're asking, what are your manager's most significant sales coaching challenges? And gentlemen, this one came in earlier, and I think it does apply to what we're discussing. Let me know if you can't see those, but this question was, what advice do you have about training varying levels of seniority and experience? Definitely a challenge that we've seen before. Any thoughts or advice on training varying levels of seniority and experience? And again, to those who have not submitted, please feel free to send through the questions feature. For the teams that are with us that are in a conference room, feel free to send those through to webinars@q1productions.com. We've got a couple here.
So, Brooke, thank you. I'll try and take a shot at the question that you posed about various levels of experience and seniority. It's actually a question that comes up quite a bit. And I think that what we really want to focus on is skill gaps. So certainly we want to be highly respectful of people who've been in a role for a period of time. There really is no substitute for experience. You get to know your industry, you get to know your products, you get to know your customers. But our emphasis is really on selling skills, and quite often we don't find this huge correlation between experience and proficiency. So what we really want to try and do is assess skill gaps and make sure that people are taking the training that aligns with the gaps they need to fill. For example, one of the issues we often encounter with highly experienced people is they know so much that they're already jumping to conclusions about their customers without necessarily posing the questions they need to pose or taking the time to listen. And unfortunately, that doesn't result in a great sales conversation. The other thing we've learned is that we really benefit from mixed groups. So again, if we're training on the right skills and we've identified those skills, maybe through a pre-training assessment or through intake interviews, having a combined audience that has newer and more experienced and leveraging the experience when it comes to sharing real-world experiences, maybe actually involving those people in the intake interviews, letting them know that we want to lean on them as part of the training experience, is a way to engage them and empower them as part of the training. So we actually like mixed groups. We find that we get more interesting conversation, but the underlying critical element is to really figure out what is the skill gaps we're trying to address, and do they apply to that person with more experience and seniority in their organization.
Thank you for that. We've gotten a couple through. Let me read a few and we can go back to them. Another challenge that someone has stated, making time to conduct the coaching. Great point. Making the coaching relevant to the right skill sets that need to be developed. Training multi-generational sales reps at varying ages. Number of great answers coming through there.
Yeah, and I can take a shot. Take a shot at a few of those, Norman. You know, I think Kate's comment about making time to conduct the coaching is one that we've heard in every single workshop and every single webinar that we've done, because it is challenging. You know, we've already got a full load. We've got 50 or 60 hours worth of meetings and sales calls and reports to review, and now you're asking me, you know, to coach additional on top of that. I think that really gets to understanding the long game of, if we can make time to coach, it will pay dividends in the future. And it also may be, we need to create a stop doing list, right? What are those time wasters or things that we're doing that maybe we can delegate, maybe we can eliminate, that we don't have to be doing to make time for this very strategic activity called coaching that's going to improve the performance of their team. You know, the other piece, I think Kate also mentioned about making coaching relevant to the right skills that need development, I think does go to having a process and some tools that you can use. Oftentimes people think they're great coaches because they can sit down and have a conversation, but they're not necessarily highlighting the most relevant things, or even having a process to refer back to, you know, the last conversation. So I think having a skill profile, being able to observe and identify 2 or 3 things to work on, and then have a conversation with the rep about developing an improvement plan for those key areas. So we kind of keep it top of mind and, you know, to the point, make it very relevant to their situation, because it needs to be very individualized. So I think those were great questions coming from Kate. The other one, Norman, and I'll ask you to respond as well, training multi-generational sales reps and varying ages. And I think we often run into that with a varied workforce and certainly changing demographics maybe on our sales team. But understanding the individual motivators, the individual influence, things that we can do to influence that team, I think is really important. And then we also talk about coachability, just assessing how open are they to suggestions. And we're not necessarily going to give everybody the same amount of coaching time because we want to spend that time where it's going to make the biggest difference. So one of the things is we want to think about our reps in terms of where are we going to get the biggest bang for the buck. And we may have to change our conversation or change our focus a little bit depending on the makeup of that group. Anything you would add to that, Norman?
Yeah, I think that you hit it right on, Ray, when you said that and it actually ties to the issue of relevancy that was brought up. Is that coaching has to be relevancy, and one of the beauties of coaching is that coaching is highly individualized. So when you assess that person's skills and you look at both how proficient they are and their motivation, you'll really get a good sense for skill gaps, and that'll actually allow you to have an individualized plan for each person on your team. Maybe one person needs help in prospecting and call planning. They're kind of at the beginning of the sales process. Maybe someone else needs help at the end of the sales process in terms of managing feedback and gaining commitment and negotiation. Many people struggle with the middle about asking the right questions. So coaching is highly individualized. The other thing I would add is if someone is producing at a acceptable level, maybe not off the charts great, but at a pretty good level, they've been with the company for a long time, and maybe they're just not that coachable, they're not receptive, coaching time doesn't have to be spent equally. Coaching is about moving the middle and coaching people that are receptive to coaching. So we do believe everyone should get some coaching, but sometimes if you're going to get a lower return on investment by someone who's not receptive, that's doing a pretty good job, versus someone who's much newer, much more receptive, eager to learn, you can balance your time accordingly. I also think it came down to something you mentioned, Ray, about process, and maybe you could just take a minute and just talk about process for coaching.
Yeah, absolutely. And we appreciate everybody responding to the chats and the polls and providing their input. Oh, I do want to be sensitive to the time. I know we're coming up on a quarter to the hour here, so we'll just wrap up this section and then we have one more topic, and I want to leave time for questions at the end. But when we think about sales coaching, we really break it up. A lot of times the focus is just on what would be the third column here, having a coaching conversation or applying a coaching model, where we really want to back up and first think about the coaching mindset. What does it even mean to think like a coach? And we have this 3A framework. So asking great questions, assuming best intentions, right? Giving them the benefit of the doubt, and then actively listening to their answers when we ask them questions. So we're engaging them and developing or collaborating on where they can improve, as opposed to just telling them to fix something or do differently. So we want to start with the mindset. We want to analyze and co-assess, as we talked about, understanding those skill areas that we can improve. And then we want to sit down and have that great coaching conversation, or go out and ride along with them, observe them in the field, and talk about what they liked about the call, what areas they were pleased, what went right, and also where they can improve going forward and how we're going to do that. So I think that makes a really nice framework to think about the why, the what, the when, and the how of coaching.
And in the interest of time, we covered the coaching pretty quickly, and all of these topics could definitely use more time. We have a really nice white paper on our website called Sales Coaching for Improved Performance that goes a little bit more detail about the 5-step model and some of the tools that we use in coaching. Ray mentioned another element we wanted to touch on, which is leading. So we all have probably thought about organizations we've worked for where we've worked for good managers, but what really makes an impression on us is when we work for great leaders. And sometimes the word manager and leader are used interchangeably, but really leadership extends beyond management. Leadership gets the ability to influence the actions and attitudes of sales teams. So it really gets to helping people surpass their goals through motivation and influence. And when we think about some of the differences between leadership and management, is management can be very reactive. So there's a new compensation plan that just came down from corporate. I got to roll it out to my team, help my team cope with the change. Whereas a sales leader is very proactive. Okay, I know this is coming. How do I get ahead of it? How do I motivate and inspire as we get to our goals for next year? How do I not just focus on this quarter, but actually, promote a vision. For example, if we're right now planning for a year end and going into 2019, what is my vision for 2019? How do I get my team to buy into that vision? What are the key goals that we're going to have associated with that? What are some of the strategies? If we have to, if there's change that's occurring, and one of the things that's always constant when we talk with our clients is that there's change. Well, how do I help initiate change as opposed to just responding to change? And really, how do I get people motivated and excited? So we really do want to help managers focus. Quite often, we'll lead off workshops with leadership. Sometimes we'll end them. We kind of see it as a higher level offering, but there's quite a bit in it for the managers because they don't want to just kind of manage and direct their team. They want to lead and inspire their teams. The areas we focus on are that area of sales vision that I described. How do I make better decisions? When is it appropriate to get others involved in the decision making? What is it not as appropriate to get others involved in the decision making? What are the criteria I use to make decisions? How do I influence and motivate others? People are individuals. People respond to different motivators. And how do I continue to keep growing as a manager? So those are 4 elements of leadership that we like to focus on. And again, these are also covered in more detail in some of our blog posts and for sure in our book, The High Impact Sales Manager. Ray, I know we had some kind of tangible takeaways that we wanted to share and also a promotion we wanted to share. So let me turn that back to you, and hopefully we'll have time for a little Q&A as well.
Yeah, well, we certainly covered a lot of ground here, Norman. As you mentioned, we'll wrap up with some time for questions. But we wanted to start with this idea of making the transition or the pivot from selling to managing, and how the skills are different. We need to invest in really developing and improving those skills. And then if we do that correctly, it has a strong ROI. So I think, what can we do to enable the managers to be more successful? We talked about getting the right people on board, so hiring, managing their performance, coaching to both improve their skills and help them close deals, and then leading and motivating your team and building the trust. And I think really taking responsibility for your own development, right, as a sales leader as you move forward. So the underlying message, hopefully, that came through here is if we can help improve those skills, both of the manager and of the reps, it'll lead to better sales results. And there's a lot of research that suggests that. As we said, we're happy to share our 2 research reports if people would like as we wrap up.
And Ray, the number 1 skill was sales coaching, and this is something you and I've worked on together, which is really to make sales coaching something that wasn't just confined to a workshop, but could also be basically a blended program. Do you want to explain how the sales coaching on demand works?
Yeah, so and this has been very well received, and people are really enjoying going through this on-demand program. And it's essentially a compilation. It follows the same content and format that we discussed here for sales coaching that we cover in our in-person, but in this case, it's a series of videos. So over a period of 4 weeks, we kick off the session. They watch about 6 videos each week. So it's a very efficient use of time. These are 3 to 5 minute videos. There's an assignment and a knowledge check each week. And then we have a weekly cohort session. So those are live facilitated sessions where they get to ask an expert about the assignments, get feedback, and we discuss some of the high level topics. So we'll be kicking off the next session in a couple of weeks here on November 16th. We do those weekly then check-ins on Fridays. And at the end of that, then you will have completed that online sales coaching curriculum and have the tools and the knowledge and the skills that you need to improve your coaching execution.
So if you'd like to learn more, please copy or write down the link here. There is an early bird discount. If you decide you want to register or know other people you want to share that with, please feel free to do so. Brooke, I want to turn it back to you. I'm going to share just a little bit of contact information if people want to learn more about SRG or have any questions. You can obviously email them to info@salesreadinessgroup.com. We love chatting with people and just learning more about their situations. And Brooke, I think if we have 1 or 2 more questions, happy to take them. I know we answered several during the course of the Q&A, but if there's others, please let us know.
Wonderful presentation, gentlemen. Yes, I'm not seeing any other questions come through right now. Did get an email, again, just asking about accessing those reports. As the gentleman mentioned, you can contact them at info@salesreadinessgroup.com, or feel free to contact me directly at webinars@q1productions.com. Would be happy to put you in touch with them, utilize those discounts, and take a look at those other materials that they have. I'll keep the question submission open for just about another minute or two, but I do think we covered a lot of great material today. Gentlemen, I will let you know if any other questions come through. Of course, if you had something that you wanted to speak to our presenters about offline, you can also get in touch with me or reach out to them at info@salesreadinessgroup.com. I know they'd be happy to speak with you. Gentlemen, not seeing any other questions come through, just some praise for a great presentation. Any closing remarks from you, gentlemen?
I would just add that we really appreciate your support and have enjoyed partnering with Q1 Productions on this webinar. We'd love to follow up with anyone who has any questions. We know a lot of our prospective clients are doing a lot of work right now planning for 2019. We'd be happy to share our research with you and try and answer any questions you have. So thank you very much. And Ray, any final comments from your end?
No, thanks again for the opportunity. I enjoyed the discussions and the involvement from the group today. I look forward to continuing the discussions as we go forward. Thank you very much.
No, thank you again to Norman Behar, who's the Chairman and Managing Director, and Ray Makela, CEO and Managing Director of Sales Readiness Group. I know someone did just ask again about the classes. They begin November 16th. There is an early bird registration. To that gentleman, I will follow off with you offline, but thank you again to everyone who attended today. We certainly appreciate you investing your time. Any further questions for myself or Sales Readiness Group, please feel free to contact us at info@salesreadinessgroup.com or webinars@q1productions.com. Thanks so much, everybody. Have a wonderful rest of the day. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.